Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. Welcome in. My name is Lisa Fain. I am the CEO of Center for Mentoring Excellence. We'll get started in just a moment. So I want to introduce you to Dr. Rajashi Ghosh. She is an associate professor of adult learning and leadership at Columbia University. Her expertise is in adult learning and development with a focus on promoting continuous learning for adults in the workplace. Before she entered academia, Dr. Ghosh worked as an assistant manager in human resources in India, and this inspired her to complete her doctorate in human resources development from the University of Louisville. Since then, she's received numerous awards for her interdisciplinary research on developmental initiatives such as mentoring, coaching, and leadership development in the workplace. Her research focuses on building inclusive relational spaces and countering workplace instability. Dr. Ghosh has served in leadership roles at Drexel University, including Program Director for Ph.D. in Education and the Department Chair for Policy, Organization, and Leadership. And her scholarly interests include developmental relationships, leader development, and workplace learning. Dr. Rajashi Ghosh, welcome.
Thank you so much for that warm introduction.
So glad. Here. So glad that you are here with us today to talk. We really want to talk about this idea of identity in mentoring, which is a topic that I've thought a lot about and I've learned a lot from reading your work on. And you've talked a lot about this, the transformative power of identity. So maybe we can just start with some a foundational question of what is transformative learning?
Well, that's a big question. So transformative learning, I would say that in my understanding, it is a process for adult learning where adults can experience significant shifts in their perspectives and beliefs following the experience of a disorienting dilemma. And what I mean by that is an experience which could be that of crisis or loss, where your current assumptions that you're using to really go by life are not working anymore. And therefore you feel disoriented, you feel at loss. And so when you're experiencing such a disorienting dilemma, there is potential for you to question your current assumptions, to reflect on why is it that the assumptions and beliefs you have and the way that they have been guiding you is not working anymore. Can you reframe those assumptions? So the reason, I guess, I'm drawn to this concept of transformative learning is I think it is very intricately connected with the concept of developmental relationships, because I feel whether it be mentoring, coaching, learning communities, peer groups, I believe that such developmental relationships can offer the holding environment, the inclusive relational space needed for someone to cope with the disorienting dilemma in a way that they can learn to question their assumptions. Because in my experience, I would say that without that holding environment, it becomes very difficult to truly realize the potential of transformative learning following a disorienting dilemma. It can even, I would argue, it can even be regressive in the sense that experiencing disorienting dilemma can throw you off the loop. And instead of it being a catalyst for TL, it can be regressive. So that's where I see the role of mentors and other types of developers be very critical for us to really realize and get on the path for transformative learning.
I'm curious more about this idea of a disorienting dilemma. How does a disorienting dilemma present itself?
I can speak from, I guess, personal experience, and this is also an experience I drew from in my recent paper I published, I co-authored with my dear colleague, Dr. Sanghamitra Chaudhary in Management Learning. And this was a duethnography of our journey of TL following the disorientation we experienced during the pandemic, when as working mothers, as women who are of color, who are first generation immigrants in academia. We were thrown into this utter chaos during the pandemic, to work from home, to lead from home, and to kind of come up with achieve this mythical idea of balance between work and life, which was completely unachievable. And we both have children. So I have 3 children. My elder is 16-year-old, and then I have 2 6-year-olds. I have twins. So this, I'm talking a couple of years back. So they were even younger. And so you can imagine, between a teenager and 2 young twins, my house was pretty chaotic. She also has twins, coincidentally, who are middle schoolers. So given the multitude of responsibilities we had as mothers, as wives, and as professors. I also had leadership roles, so as department chair, as researchers. We were very much torn between what to do, when to do, how to do. And so in terms of TL, I specifically experienced, and this is connected to the topic of identity, right? Because when we think about that kind of a context, and we think about how disoriented we felt, through conversations with each other, we realized that the disorientation is largely stemming from the current assumptions we have about what is good mothering, what is good, the norms of being a good professional. So what is the ideal worker image? What is the ideal mother image? Where are we drawing that from? Whether we are drawing that from our cultural beliefs that we have been socialized into, that we have really grown up with. And if that is the situation, that is the case, and it's not just the cultural beliefs we have grown up with, but also having immigrated to the United States, we have internalized certain cultural beliefs as well, and tried to kind of reconcile that with the beliefs from our countries of origin. So then now having internalized all of that, and now facing the disorientation, when during the pandemic, the idea of having separate boundaries for work and life and family was thrown out of the window, we were faced with that critical existential question about, can we then really take a hard look at our assumptions and beliefs about good mothering and good working, and look in the mirror and say that maybe it's time to change those, than try to kill ourselves to live by those assumptions. It's time to change those. And that's where the motivation for TL then comes into play. But going back to my point about how relationships can offer holding spaces without my dear colleague and friend's support, I don't think I would have been able to embark on that journey, because it was too overwhelming. And one thing, and many are in attendance here who are familiar with the concept of TL, I would also highlight here, is that while there is excitement or motivation to kind of explore if you can question your assumptions and reframe your assumptions, there's also a sense of loss in that you are letting go of something familiar. Now, that something familiar might be something very toxic, which is not healthy for you, but nonetheless, to part ways with something that you're so used to, in terms of, this is the way to mother, this is the way to work as a professor, as a researcher, as a colleague, as a leader, there is a sense of loss there, and it requires a lot of unlearning. And that's where I think having a supportive colleague, a developer who is walking that journey with you in some ways, is huge.
Yeah, these terms of developer and holding space are so powerful and so important to introduce into the practice of mentoring, because it takes out, I shouldn't say that it takes out, it introduces this notion of an active role in a partner in creating that learning journey, that transformative learning journey. And I'm wondering if you can just talk a little bit more about that, Rajashi, in terms of what is it that your colleague did to be that developer for you and to hold that space, and how can we think about that when we think about what mentors can and mentees can do for one another?
Absolutely. So, of course, one privilege I had in this particular relationship is, as I said, we were friends. So we already had a strong foundation of trust in the relationship. But nonetheless, I would say that, so I will go back to square one to say that if it's a new relationship, trust building comes first. And how do you do that, right? It's easier said than done. And I think in your book also I've been reading, which you're going to show the attendees towards the end, but I just wanted to kind of give a shout out to your book, Bridging Differences for Better Mentoring, by Elisa Fain and Louis Zachary. In that, you've also mentioned about how much upfront investment there needs to happen in the beginning of the relationship to build trust. And that, I would say, starts from reflecting, doing self-reflective exercises to build self-awareness. If you're not aware of who you are to the extent possible that you can push yourself to be aware in terms of what assumptions you bring to the table, it's very then, it doesn't build a strong foundation for your mentoring partner, your mentee, mentor to then really trust you. And what I mean by that is you should start with reflecting on what mentoring means to you, who you think you want to be as a mentor, what is your motivation to mentor or be in a mentoring relationship. And all of these are driven by your worldview or schema of mentoring. No one comes with a blank slate. And you would think that, well, some of you might think that I haven't had experience participating in a formal mentoring program and hence I have a blank slate. Well, I will challenge you to then think about any developmental interaction, relationship you might have had in your life, and think broadly to even include your family, your friends, your community. So it's not that the idea of mentoring needs to be restricted to professional domain. And that's hence the word developer, because the word developer specifically is recommended by Higgins and Cram in their revolutionary work on developmental networks. And they're arguing that we give so less credit to our relationships broadly when we learn so much from them, because our, kind of bias is to think about mentoring only within the professional domain. So then thinking broadly about all the kinds of developmental interactions you must have had, whoever you've sought advice from, whoever you wanted to, have as a sounding board, whoever you confided with, then think about what mentoring means to you and what the word mentor specifically prompts you to think of. And when I'm in person, Lisa, I use the, and I will also, recommend, because I really love the Center of Creative Leadership, CCL, picture cards. And I, share the picture cards for participants to pick a picture from, to say, which picture speaks to you in terms of when you think about the word mentor. One of my participants in one of the sessions picked a picture of a cereal bowl with cereal in like milk. And when I asked like, why this, he clarified is that because this resonates with me, because for me, mentoring is being in the trenches together, shoulder to shoulder, and the cereal particles in the bowl of milk kind of resemble that sense of empathizing with each other because you're in the trenches together. So you never know then, what specific schema you are bringing to the table until you spend that time up front to do that deep reflection. And picture cards is one example where it could be a creative way to kind of dig deep, because we are so much kind of always running in life. For deep reflection, a creative prompt helps to kind of go deeper within ourselves, right? So, it could be any other creative prompt that could help you, whatever works for you. But the idea is to spend some time to get to know yourself in terms of how your prior experiences might have significantly shaped your understanding of mentoring, and then share that story with each other in the relationship. That's just such a refreshing way to know yourself and to share about yourself with your mentoring partner, because I'm a big proponent of storytelling and story sharing. And again, that's something that I've seen in consulting with organizations that have designed mentoring programs, launched mentoring programs. I feel pained to see how at times the I wouldn't say at times, I would say most times, the fast pace of the performative culture we have built in organizations kind of tend to skip over those phases to say that, yes, that's important, but we need to talk about the goals. We need to talk about the task. And that's short-sighted, because then what happens is that, that whatever advice, coaching that they're seeking from their mentor in terms of that specific goal, it doesn't go deep in terms of how the mentor had engaged with that strategy, what they are going to share with them through a lens of who they are. And going back to that identity piece, right? So then the advice that the mentor is giving or whatever strategy that they're sharing, it kind of like lands very generic. It doesn't speak to the person of who that, the mentor really is. And to what, because that then opens the window. Like once the mentor shares from a more personal perspective of who they are, and then puts that lens on a strategy that might have worked in their career in the way that they tell story about that experience to their mentee, that opens the window for the mentor and mentee to have a conversation about, wait, like this has worked for you, and this is the way I feel like in my context with my identities, this may or may not work for me. So, hey, then let's talk about why it may not work for me, and then what improvisations I might need to make to that career strategy for it to make it work for me. And so that then kind of is the window for even like deeper level conversation. I think another thing that caught my eye in your book, Lisa, is about the different stages of conversation, right? So it starts with monologue, and then I think transaction, and then it slowly kind of gets to the level of a dialogue or collaborative conversation. But that's where, the higher quality conversation, in my experience, can be facilitated through a more personal, self-reflective storytelling manner than just like goal ABC, this is what I need to do and tell me how to do it or how you've done it. So I know I've been going on, so I'll stop.
No, there's so much gold in what you've just said, Rajshi. And I want to go back to that cereal metaphor because it's so apt in so many ways. I thought you were going somewhere totally different when you talked about the bowl of cereal. I'll tell you where I thought you were going, which also works, which is it's not just that they're in the trenches together, but the milk in the bowl of cereal is also transformed, right? Because you get the flavor from the cereal, right? And it goes to this idea of co-creation, right? Of the developer, the mentor, the mentee together in the bowl of cereal, right? Really transforming the environment and transforming the relationship together. And I think this idea of using a prompt, an external prompt to create, to develop that co-creation and that sense of learning and that foundation is really, really powerful. Those CCL cards are really, really terrific. We use something as well. But storytelling in general is, it's so much more generative when you use something to draw that out and builds trust. So really, really terrific. Before I get to our next question, I just want to acknowledge Sangamitra and Brian have both put resources in the chat. One is your journal article, Rajshi, so people can click on that. Thank you for doing that. And then Brian has cited to Kathy Cram's Mentoring at Work, Developmental Relationships and Organizational Life, which of course is really one of the seminal pieces in this work. And actually, just for those in attendance, it's actually Dr. Cram who brought Rajshi and I together and made that into a mutual
talk about building network, right? So we're kind of living it as we are talking about it, because Dr. Kathy Cram is the common connector between the two of us, and that's how we met, and that's how we thought we'll have this conversation. And I came to know about Lisa's book. So it is impactful in terms of how networks can change the trajectory of your life. And before you go on to your next question, Lisa, if I may just build off what you just now said in terms of what direction you went to with the cereal and the milk, I think that's a great metaphor of how, if two people or individuals can co-develop a truly mutual partnership in their mentoring or developmental relationship, I do think that can then spill over to influence the organizational culture. we talk about learning organizations. And we have my dear colleague, Dr. Victoria Marsick, and Karen Watkin has done foundational work on learning organizations. And I think that's how I see the concept of developmental relationships bridge onto the idea of learning culture in organizations, is that it can start in the space of a mentoring relationship, but a lot of the skills, and Dr. Bellerose Reagans also specifically talks about this, that the impact of a high quality mentoring relationship, it spills over beyond the relationship in particular to influence the culture, the context, because the two people who have co-developed that kind of mutual partnership, in the process of doing that, they've built cultural competence, they've built relational skills. And so that same skill set will then apply to any other relationship they're enacting, building in that organization, whether it be a supervisor-subordinate relationship, whether it be a peer-colleague relationship. So it transfers. And then, it leads to building learning culture. So I thought the milk really then resembles that learning culture in the organization. Sorry.
Yeah, it's really terrific. No, not to apologize, because I think that that's a great ad and a great delineation of really what we're talking about here. It's also so important when I can't even tell you the number of mentees who I talk to in an organizational context who say, I have something I want to raise with my mentor, but I don't want to bother them. And this metaphor is so powerful in speaking to them as well, because as you say, the gift of a really high quality developmental relationship is that is this idea of reciprocity, is its transformational nature, not just for the participants in the relationship itself, but beyond that. And so it's great for mentees to know that when they approach their mentor, it's really a gift to add to that transformation too. All right, I'm now hungry for cereal, so I know what's going to be in my lunch. I love that. Thank you for that. It also really speaks to the power of something outside, because I bet you that metaphor never would have come up if you had just asked to develop something. So thanks so much for that. So let's just talk about how can we generate this transformative nature in our mentoring relationships.
Yes, so I think that's where in my body of work also I have seen a shift. Initially, when I started my career as a scholar in academia, I would say that I was more focused on skill development, attitude development, and mentoring. But lately, I've shifted that focus to identity development. I think that's where we need to kind of come back to what is the purpose of the mentoring relationship, and if the purpose is related to identity development in any way, shape, or form, I would say that there is greater potential for a transformative experience. If the purpose is more kind of restricted towards developing certain skill for a certain role, for a certain performance, then I'm not totally kind of ruling out the possibility. I would just say the likelihood of a transformative experience is relatively lesser. So coming back to then the identity aspect of it, which is fascinating to me in the sense that in my personal experience of experiencing high quality mentoring relationships, in my experience of researching high quality mentoring relationships, I have, over and over come across this realization that identity is foundational, because it goes back to that self-awareness piece, right? Because we as individuals, we need to start from the place of deep reflection in terms of who we are. How do we connect that, that understanding of who we are to what we think about a mentoring role, and then, how we are connecting with someone in our mentoring relationship. So if that's a pathway to building a high quality mentoring, why is it that identity is not treated as a central aspect in practice when it comes to mentoring programs or mentoring relationships otherwise in organizations? So one thing I've realized is that it's messy. When you think about deep reflection, it's about being vulnerable. It's about kind of really looking hard in the mirror, and I would say that most of us are not always comfortable to do that, because we don't feel psychologically safe to do that. And so that goes back to then the impact that the context of the organization can have on the kinds of mentoring relationships that get developed, right? It's easy to say that the two people involved should kind of be bold enough to be courageous enough to explore this kind of transformative experience. But if the context is not collaborative, it is competitive to the extent that it breeds mistrust, or the context has kind of exposed individuals specifically with identities that are marginalized to microaggressions, then to expect that the developmental relationships will kind of become a transformative experience, I don't think is a practical one, and it's not a feasible one. So that's where I think how can we build a transformative experience in a developmental relationship? It's got to do more than just the two people involved in the relationship. It's got to do with the context. It's got to do with how they see others are also aligned with that value of being vulnerable and learning from differences from each other, instead of really being driven by stereotypical understanding of each other's identities. And it takes time, Lisa. So again, even the organizations that I've seen that are willing to do that deep and hard work, it takes time to really shift the paradigm, shift the culture in terms of being okay with that messiness, being okay with that ambiguity in the beginning. But I think we, at least the leaders who are championing the program, the leaders who are in the design team of the program, need to model that in terms of what it means to be vulnerable. It's, again, easier said than done. But can you model that, to just encourage others to take that leap is something that can go a long way. And also, I think a culture that normalizes mistakes, normalizes failures, and the leaders modeling that goes a long way, because as you said, a lot of times as mentees, we shy away from being ourselves with our mentors because we are performing. I understand that mentoring relationships are also this kind of a stage we're on, that we want to show the best side of who we are to our mentor, because we want our mentor to think highly of ourselves. And who doesn't, right? Everyone would. And that's natural. But in that quest, we shouldn't kind of lose out on really embracing the messiness of who we are as whole people, as whole person, because otherwise then the mentoring relationship purely becomes a performative kind of process where you're enacting a certain version of yourself because you think that is going to mostly impress your mentor. And I've experienced both versions of that. I've performed in mentoring, and then I've kind of opened up. And I think that if I were to compare those two experiences, I would say the mentor, the one in the relationship where I could open up, played a huge role in terms of that subtle invitation to go deep, to open up, to model vulnerability, to storytell about their failures. And that kind of emboldened me to say that, okay, I don't need to be always portray the successful image to be in the good books of my mentor, right? So the mentor has a huge responsibility in making that space, creating that space. And I think it also goes on to I'll say one last thing and I'll turn it to you. But it also emphasizes the importance of diffusing any kind of distance that's created from hierarchical difference. Because again, the mentoring relationships where I did open up, even if the mentor was in a senior position than I was at that point in my career, even though they had different identities than I brought to the table, they knew that there is a hierarchical dynamics in the relationship that needs to be diffused. And how did they do that? So in many ways, and one of the most prominent ways they did it is they verbalized how they learned from me. So
Mm.
imagine, like, we talk about mutuality, we talk about that the mentees need to understand that they can bring something to the table. But when you hear your mentor say how they've learned from you, that blows your mind. That, like, okay, it's like, okay, like I never thought that someone who's so established, who's so accomplished, is saying this, but they mean it. And that's the other part. It's like they're not just saying it for the sake of saying it, they do mean it. And I do want to kind of specifically give a shout out to Dr. Kathy Cram on this one, because I remember she was, I believe, receiving a Lifetime Achievement Award at Academy of Management. And she asked me if I'm attending. And I said, of course. And I'm attending. And I didn't think twice as to why would she ask me if I was attending. So I remember this room full of people, like all accomplished scholars, faculty, students, and everyone. And I sat towards the back of the room. I was an early career faculty at that point. And I sat at the back of the room, and of course, she's going through her deck of slides in terms of her body of work and how she has really enjoyed that journey. And then she comes on to a few slides where she has put pictures of people who have really challenged her, influenced her. And she has, of course, foundational scholars. And then she had my picture on that. And I almost fell off the chair. And I'm like, wait, what? But that's why she was asking, like, will you be attending? Because she sincerely meant it, that my background being from adult learning and development gave her a different lens, because she comes from a school of business background. So she meant that what she meant that the adult learning and development lens gave her a different perspective to studying mentoring as a phenomenon. And that was just mind-blowing, because that gave me such a boost of confidence in terms of, wow, I have made an impact in her journey. It was so humbling and honoring at the same time. But that's what a high quality mentor is that they verbalize it, they are explicit about how they have learned.
Yes, the specificity is so fantastic. Had it just been your picture without the lesson of how, it would have been, you still would have fell off your chair, but you might not have gotten the same boost of confidence because you didn't realize what the lens that she was operating from. That mutuality of learning is so important, and really inviting teaching from the mentee to the mentor, as well as inviting learning, is really important. I just want to also acknowledge Brian has put in the chat. He says, so identity is foundational in mentorship because if the mentor can relate with the mentee at a more personal level, the mentorship journey can be more deep for both the mentor and the mentee. Your thoughts on that?
Couldn't agree more, Brian. Thank you. Yes, so I think that the word relationship has in it embedded that you need to relate and you need to be relatable to each other. And if you're not kind of applying that personal lens, then how would you be relatable? Now, here I do want to address one kind of point of caution. And in my scholarship, in my practice, I've seen, and I do kind of, that resonates with me as well, that people are conflicted in terms of to what extent should we make it personal? Where is the boundary? Because I do want to have a boundary, but at the same time, I want to be relating deeply with my mentor or my mentee, and that's a very valid concern. And so, in the way that I see the relationships work the best is that you need to have that boundary conversation in the very beginning. Now, with that boundary conversation still happening, I still think it's possible to relate in a personal way. You can just share in terms of what's your best cuisine, of preferred cuisine, and why. Food a lot of times gets us talking about culture, about identity, right? And so what is your best cuisine and why can be a way to connect. What's like, do you have a pet? Like, why do you love your pet? So those are, I think, windows of personal connection that are less likely to be intrusive in terms of really you trying. If you don't want to open up in terms of your family, your personal life, you don't have to, but you can still have a personal level connection through talking about what kind of food you like, what kind of places you've been to in the in terms of your travel, if you have a pet and things like that. So but that boundary conversation is likely to be different based on the relationships, and there's no absolute prescription. And that's why we encourage, along with that self-reflective exercise, we encourage the mentor-mentee pairs to kind of also reflect upon what is okay to be discussed, what's not okay to be discussed. And it's a living document. We say that and I think in your book also, Lisa, you talk about agreements, right? So mentoring agreements, where it's a mutual shared understanding that the mentor and mentee come to in terms of what kind of topics should be discussed, what should be off the limits, and why. And then, because it's a living document, as the relationship progresses, as the trust builds, you could revisit some of that.
Yeah,
But
it does.
yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I often use a metaphor, and I see Carla's on the line. I just used it with her organization last week, of an apartment building, right? And there are appropriate conversations based on what level. There's what lobby conversations, which is kind of, how is the weather? Tell me about your pet. You're not going to approach somebody in the lobby of an apartment building and ask them, what motivates them to learn or what have you. That's too deep, right? You got to take time to kind of ride up the elevator for the subsequent deepening of the conversation, right? And I think that goes to your point, is that it's so important to have those conversations initially and to use it to be fluid and evolve as trust builds. The sharing will deepen, and recognizing also that varies so much by person, by culture. And the more marginalized I think somebody has felt, the less likely it might be that they open up initially, because you really do have to build trust, particularly when you have a relationship cross difference. So
Absolutely. And I think in specifically cross identity relationships, it's important as that, kind of progressive, like as the relationship kind of progresses, for both people to kind of embrace the idea of storytelling, because then truly, both parties get to learn from each other's differences. And in that way, the blind spots we have about a certain identity that we don't have but someone else has, it really gives us a very personalized view of what does it mean to live in the shoes of that identity, in the context, and most of the times it's widely different. And that's the scope, that's the power. I think Dr. Bellerose Reagan once mentioned in one of the interviews she did, is that diverse mentoring relationships is an experiential laboratory, and it's much better than diversity training, because when you're in the relationship, you're experientially learning, talking about adult learning, you're experientially learning what it means to connect with someone who is different from you, who has different life experiences from you. Just a quick plug there, I would also make, Lisa, is that when we talk about identity and mentoring, we tend to mostly talk about diverse relationships, which is definitely an important topic. But I also want to bring into light the topic of shared identity relationships, because in my experience, I've also seen that such relationships, now of course research says is that because there is a shared identity aspect, it's more likely to be successful, spontaneous, high quality, because there is a shared foundation. But a lot of times that kind of relationship misses the mark, because the mentor takes you for granted, because we are both women, therefore I know what you feel or how you feel. Well, not true. So you need to really make space for your mentee, even if you share a particular identity, to think independently, and you need to listen intently. Even if you are sharing one identity, you shouldn't make assumptions that you know this person or that you know what it feels like to be in that person's shoes. And talking about the concept of intersectionality, right? I've been very much influenced by Kimberly Crenshaw's work on intersectionality, and I've tried to apply that lens to mentoring, studying mentoring. Seldom would you find that you share all the identities. So you might share one identity, but there might be other identities that this individual has that you don't have. And so the intersection then of the identities that they have makes their experience as a whole different from what you're experiencing. So even if you have a shared identity, you need to be reflective and alert as to how then that can make you have this blind spot that this person, and that whatever you've experienced would translate exactly to their life.
It's such a great point. It's also this skill of appreciative inquiry of, here's what my journey was. Tell me what it's been for you. How does that land for you? How might that be different for you? Why might this resonate? Why doesn't it resonate? You know, and ending any statement that a mentor makes that ends in a period, I like to encourage them to add a tack on that ends in a question mark, right?
Yeah.
Just to really draw out the like, okay, and then what for you? Because especially adult mentees are not empty vessels. They come with their own experiences, their own stuff. We all have our own stuff, right? And so really sharing that. So that's excellent, excellent. As we think about this, we talked about what the mentor can do. How do we want to show up as men? If we're a mentee, what is it that we can do to make sure that we're showing up authentically ready for this transformative learning experience?
Thank you, Lisa. So again, I think going back to your earlier point, I think how you show up shifts through successive interactions. But if it's your first meeting, I think, again, I'll go back to that point of deep reflection. If you show proactive effort of doing that deep reflection, it can inspire your mentor to follow you. And so be intentional, be proactive in terms of really being purposeful about why you're here. And that goes a long way. And I've benefited from being purposeful in my mentoring conversations. Purposeful, not in the sense that, oh, I have a specific goal that I have that I want you to help me with. It's purposeful in the sense that you bring a vision to your mentor, that this is the scope of learning I'm hoping to have in this relationship, and this is why. And it also goes a long way to kind of being strategic. And I'll go back to the concept of developmental networks here. So what I mean by being strategic is that, again, all of us have a network of people. If whether we call them mentor or not, we have a network of people that we typically go to. So when we are adding a specific mentor to the network, we need to be aware of what kind of support we already have from the people we have in our network. Where is the gap? How can we be then purposeful to fill that gap in terms of the kind of support I'm lacking in the network I currently have? So being strategic means then that, you know, bring that proactive kind of mindset into the conversation to say that, and as a mentor, I think from both my scholarship and practice, I would say mentors appreciate that hugely in terms of, because they also then can kind of learn from how you are strategizing your network, right? In terms of how you are very intentional about what is it that you're looking to kind of learn from in this particular relationship vis-a-vis the other relationships that you have. And I think there's this concept of relational coordination that is also being used in developmental network literature, relationships literature. What it really means is that as a mentee, say, suppose you want to talk about topic A with your mentor, like there's a particular challenge you're experiencing, whether it be at, you know, it be at work or whether it be with a certain, you know, project that you've been put on. You want to talk about that with your mentor. But when you're trying to start that conversation, it helps to kind of maybe open the conversation with, I've thought about this. This is where I am with the challenge. And this is who I've spoken with. You don't need to identify the individuals you've spoken with, but just mention that I've had earlier conversations and this is what they shared that their perspective is, but I've been kind of weighing in on it. And this is what clicks, this doesn't. What do you think? So you see what I'm saying is that it's not that you just brought the challenge to this particular mentor. What you did is you, in your head, you coordinated the circle of advice you've already kind of listened to and reflected upon and weighed in on, and you kind of positioned this mentor to give their input at a juncture where you are in terms of reflecting on that challenge. That it really speaks a lot in terms of how reflective you are as a person. And the mentor then automatically gets hooked in terms of like, wow, you really don't, you know, how to position a certain topic for my thinking. And then that leads to a generative conversation because what that tells the mentor is that you want to be incorporated as an equal partner in that conversation. It's like, it's not that you're just asking the mentor, like, give me the solution. No. What you're saying is that this is what I've heard, this is what I've been thinking, tell me what you think, and then I'll tell you what I think. So that is huge in terms of positioning the conversation.
The intentionality around that is just, it's so powerful, right? It also really helps to neutralize the power dynamic as well, to think of, to position yourself as a thought partner and not just a receptacle. Is that's gold, worth the price of admission, as we say, beyond the price of admission here. That's terrific. So we've been kind of implicitly talking about these hierarchical models of mentoring. And before we go, I want to bring together what we've been talking about in terms of developmental networks and in terms of mentoring. And I want to just ask you your thoughts on the benefits of some of these alternative models. We know we call it complementary mentoring. Others sometimes call it reverse mentoring. There's certainly peer mentoring, mentoring circles. Any thoughts, Rajshi, on those alternative models of mentoring and what the benefit can be when we think about things like identity?
Absolutely. I think the benefit can be huge. And I'll give a shout out to my dear colleague's work and my friend, Dr. Sangamitra Chaudhary, who is in attendance here. She's particularly looking into the topic of reverse mentoring. And I've had great many conversations with her, collaborating with her to learn about the concept of reverse mentoring. So I think these alternative spaces, relational spaces, whether it be reverse mentoring, mentoring circles, peer mentoring, I think these different types really are very much kind of explicit ways of challenging the traditional hierarchical notion of mentoring. It can also be a kind of first step towards building mutuality in the relationship. A lot of times when we consult with organizations, they are a little wary at times of the term reverse mentoring because they say, why can't it be reciprocal mentoring? So, the answer to that, I would say, is, well, you're trying to skip the first step and go on to the second step in terms of, if you want the relationship to be mutual, the organization needs to be intentional in terms of building this learning culture where even if you're a senior person, you need to be willing to learn from a junior person. And that's the idea of reverse, is that you reverse the power dynamics first. And then you try to kind of build a level playing ground in terms of mutuality. Can you reverse? Can you let go of your ego? Can you let go of that, oh, I'm senior and therefore I know kind of attitude? And again, it's not just on the individual. So I keep going back to the system, the context. If the context, and I've seen many leaders who want to do that, but because they don't want to face loss, because the organization's culture prevents them from being humble, from showing humility, from being vulnerable, because the culture is such that as a senior person, you're supposed to know it all. You're supposed to be the expert. And if you're not, then, it's kind of associated with shame. And that's the problem. And specifically for individuals with marginalized identities, it's then even more difficult to kind of walk the path of vulnerability, because you're judged harshly in terms of if you are normalizing, trying to normalize any mistake that you've learned from. And that is the right way to approach mistakes. I'm looking forward to Amy Edmondson's talk on learning from failures. She's the keynote speaker in our upcoming 2024 Academy of Human Resource Development Conference. So the point I'm trying to make here is that all these alternative types of mentoring and developmental relationship models, I think, make it easier from a very practical perspective to show it how the hierarchy can be diffused or reversed or whatnot, because otherwise it's a nice thing to say. It's so difficult to actually do it. That's where these alternative models, specifically also, I will say from a theoretical standpoint, the relational mentoring model and the critical feminist multicultural mentoring model, it really helps to kind of flip the hierarchy. Talking about metaphors, recently I was having a conversation with one of my colleagues here at TC, and we were talking about these different theoretical models. And so, which actually connects to your question of alternative ways of mentoring. So think about this, like there is a road, and your mentee and the mentor is standing. Traditional mentoring would be the mentor gives you a map of the road. Like, okay, I give you a map, follow the map, and you'll be fine. Now, the map is generic. It is not tied to your experiences, lived experiences. It is kind of coming from a place of like the mentor has followed that map and been successful. It should work for you. But there's a lot of problem there because the mentee's identities are not really acknowledged. Now think about the road again, and the mentor and the mentee. And the mentor is like, I have a map, but I will walk the journey with you, and we can correct the map as we go about it. And so that speaks of mutuality, where the mentor is willing to kind of, again, be in the trenches with the mentee, walk the journey, and is willing to learn in terms of how the map needs to be edited and changed and modified. I would put relational mentoring in that second bucket. The third one, I would say, is that there's the road, the mentor and the mentee. And the mentor is like, yes, there's a map. We will walk the journey together, but we will remake the road if needed. So if we see that a certain juncture, the certain bend of the road is too treacherous, then we'll just kind of remake it, reconstruct the road together. Because while I can maybe jump across the pool of water, you might not be able to, because our identities are different, and I acknowledge that. So what works for me, even if the road is broken, I could make it work for me, it might not work for you. So let's reconstruct the road together. So that, I would say, critical feminist, multicultural model of mentoring really speaks to. So this is the power of alternative perspectives.
That's fantastic. That's really fantastic. All right, I want to get to one question which came in from, and I hope I'm getting your name pronunciation right. Names are important to me, so forgive me if I've mispronounced it. I think it's Obedre Willis says, "Hi, Dr. Ghosh. Thank you for sharing your insights. I'd like to build my question based on your explanation of the difference between identity and work performance aspects as the basis of the mentoring relationship, which determines the possibility of a transformational learning experience. My question is it a zero-sum game, or can it be relatively dynamic to some extent?"
Thank you, Beth, for that question. And just so that I'm clarifying if I'm following your question, when you say, is it a zero-sum game, or can it be relatively dynamic, are you referring to the experience of transformative learning? Is that it either kind of transcends to that experience where you're both trying to reframe assumptions and you're successful at that, or that it could be more of a journey? Is that what you're trying to ask?
Experience on the transformational learning, he says.
Yes, no, I don't think it's a zero-sum game. Transformative learning, I think, takes time. In fact, the study that I was referring to earlier with my colleague, Dr. Sanghmitra Chaudhary, we pretty much started the journey, which we spoke about in the study. It takes a lot of investment to kind of sustain that trajectory, but the more support you extend towards each other, the more you can make progress on that journey. So I do not think the experience on transformational learning can ever be targeted as a zero-sum game, which can be accomplished within a certain targeted sphere of time.
Thank you. Rajashi, Dr. Ghosh, this has been incredible, and I have so many more things that I want to ask you. We are at the end of our time together. I just want to ask Michelle if you would put a slide up so folks know how to get in touch with Dr. Ghosh should they have questions and have some information about our future sessions here. You can see Dr. Ghosh's contact information here, as well as ours at Center for Mentoring Excellence. So we will also be sending a recording of this session out as well. And if you enjoyed this, please join us for future thought leader conversation sessions. We have one coming up. The next one is on purpose and mentoring with Aaron Hurst. That's on March 12th, and on April 9th on engagement and retention and mentoring with Dr. Bev Kay, who some of you might recognize from National Mentoring Month. Rajshi, this has been so wonderful and generative and inspiring for me. As you know, I think about this stuff a lot, and I've learned so much from you in just this short time together. So thank you so much for your time and your generosity of sharing today.
I have thoroughly, equally enjoyed. So thank you for inviting me and giving me the space to share and to learn from this conversation and the questions.
Wonderful. Well, we look forward at the Center for Mentoring Excellence to continue to support your work and your scholarship. And I know we'll be in touch. But thank you, everybody, for joining and for the great comments and questions in the chat. Appreciate you. Have a good day.
Take care. Bye-bye.